I had studied composition, music composition, of course, and I regarded myself as a composer. But I was teaching in a new university in Vancouver, and it was a communication department that I'd been hired to teach in. And I didn't really know very much about communications, although I had been quite close to Marshall McLuhan, who did a lot of work and research in communications, as everybody knows. In particular, I wanted to study acoustic communications and all kinds of acoustic communications, just personal talking between people, the sounds around us, the sounds made by the environment, the sounds from the past, the sounds of the future, and so forth. And creating that kind of a subject was very difficult, actually, because we didn't have a word to describe what I was talking about. And if you don't have a word to describe clearly what it is that everyone can understand, then it doesn't exist. And I think that's the reason that we paid very little attention to sound in our lives up to that period. And so if we'd done anything with the work in the acoustic environment and the soundscape, which is a word I had to create, then we, I think, managed to give that subject a real expression. I think the work that was done then at Simon Fraser University was very important worldwide. And the book, which I called originally The Tuning of the World, which was then translated into French as Le Paysage Sonore, The Tuning of the World is more accurate because what I really was thinking was that we are responsible for tuning the world. It's like tuning an instrument. You know, you tune your violin so that you can play beautifully. Well, you can tune the sounds of the world, too, so that we have the kind of acoustic environment that is beautiful and not full of noises and other things that eliminate, that crush sounds, that destroy beautiful sounds. I think at that time, 1965, was about the most noisiest time in the Western world. The reason for that is that I would say that jet aircraft were just coming in, commercial jet aircraft in the early 1960s. That meant that the noise profile around airports was much larger than it had ever been, that people were complaining about the noise. Also, in North America, the car manufacturers began to produce what they called muscle cars. Muscle cars were noisy cars. You know, so there was another area, you know, that was of complaint. There were just too many, and the Concorde, of course, was. They were going to introduce the Concorde. Fortunately, that didn't work out. But, I mean, there were many new noises in the 1960s, and so people were becoming, I know, because of the surveys we did, people were becoming much more concerned about the deterioration of the acoustic environment. Little by little, I think it has had an influence on our thinking. The question, for instance, of where are the disappearing sounds, who's collecting them. Now there are many people who are collecting disappearing sounds and working with them and creating musical compositions from them. One person, by the way, I should mention this, who influenced me a great deal was Pierre Schaeffer. Pierre Schaeffer was the first person to record sounds, any sounds, and then manipulate them and turn them into compositions. So it was he was a very big influence at that time, I think, and his books influenced us all. So it was much later that we began to meet people in other countries that were interested in similar kinds of problems. And it was only when we began to travel and meet together and have conferences that we were able to form the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology. That exists, and we have meetings every year. And you'd be surprised at the area that these researchers now are exploring and coming from different traditions and different countries, and the research that's going on is really quite amazing. So we've done a lot in the last 4 decades. Well, noise is any unwanted sound, and of course, you know, you could have a very quiet noise too. I mean, it can be something that just a small hum that is bothering you and you can't go to sleep, you know, listening to this sound. So it's noise. Noise is not necessarily a loud sound. It's a sound that is the opposite in a way of the paysage sonore. I mean, it's what you don't want, what you want to eliminate. And and those noises change. You know, what is considered a noise in one society is not considered a noise in another society. So we tend to be trying to escape noises by going inside houses. People in the past spent a lot more time outside, as we know. I think the soundscape today is much quieter than it was in the 60s and 70s. Now, that may surprise a lot of people, and it's very hard to go back and actually do measurements in 1960, although, you know, some measurements were done. But I think there's no doubt that the technologies have reduced some of their noise emission, and so that we're in a somewhat quieter world than we were at that time. However, in the world of entertainment, for instance, there has been no reduction of noise in pop music. Rock concerts still have 110 decibels or more, and people listen to it and destroy themselves by doing so. I think that what we are entering now is the beginning of an area of soundscape design, in which many of the people that have become interested in our work in different countries, I mentioned the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology, in many different countries there are people that are now beginning to design sounds, to design the sounds of locomotives, the whistles on trains, to design the sounds in airports, for instance, so you don't have, voices screaming at you all the time, flight 471 for, there's other ways of getting the information to people without interrupting, their thinking and so forth, and leaving them in peace when they have to spend 2 or 3 hours or more in an airport waiting. So I think there's a lot more thinking about acoustic design for the future, and that's the way the world seems to want it at the moment. I think the La Semaine du Son that you have in France is amazing and wonderful, and I hope it continues, because you've done something that no other country has yet been able to do, and that is you brought all the sound makers together to at least meet each other and talk and see that there is a relationship between their work. And I think that's very important. And I have nothing but praise for Christian Hugonnet and his team for what they've accomplished. And now it's beginning to catch on in other countries too. So that will be something really interesting if we do have weeks of sound in different. If we had 52 countries that celebrated the La Semaine du Son, we could do nothing but go from one conference to another. Wonderful, eh?